Welcome back to the channel. If you watched part 1, you already know the basics. Jacobo Grinberg, Mexico's most daring neuroscientist, vanished without a trace in 1994 after spending his career studying what most scientists wouldn't dare touch: telepathy, psychokinesis, the very fabric of consciousness itself. In this second and final part, we go further down the rabbit hole. We examine his last known experiments, the people who may have wanted him gone, and the extraordinary claims that have resurfaced in recent years. Claims that could reshape everything we think we know about reality. Let's begin.
We left you in the dark, and I know that's where you've been, turning it over in your mind. The face of a man who saw too much, who asked too many questions, who reached into the fabric of reality and pulled something out. On December 8, 1994, 4 days before his 48th birthday, Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum walked into the labyrinth of his own mystery and never walked out. His laboratory at the National Autonomous University of Mexico was found stripped clean. Every research note, every EEG recording, every piece of equipment that had documented the impossible, gone. Not stolen, taken, carefully, deliberately, as if someone or something wanted to erase the evidence that any of it had ever existed. His family had planned a birthday celebration for December 12th. He never arrived. And in the beginning, and this is important, they weren't immediately worried. Jacobo was a wanderer, a seeker. He would disappear for days, sometimes weeks, chasing knowledge in remote villages, sitting with shamans, meditating in caves. Non-communication was his default. But December became January, and January became February, and the phone never rang. And here is where the story fractures into something stranger than fiction. Teresa Mendoza, Jacobo's last wife, the woman who shared his bed and his secrets, had also vanished. Not days later, not weeks later. Around the same time, the same window, the same silence. Two people, connected by love and by research into the deepest mysteries of consciousness, simply ceased to exist. In May of 1995, 5 months after the disappearance, the case finally reached the desk of Agent Clemente Padilla. He was methodical. He was thorough. He interviewed colleagues, students, family. He searched financial records. He followed every lead that existed. And he found nothing. No body, no evidence of foul play, no paper trail, no witnesses. The most brilliant neuroscientist in Mexican history had evaporated like morning fog over Lake Zumpango, and the official investigation yielded absolutely nothing. 30 years later, the case remains officially unsolved. In 2025, the family broke their long silence. In a remarkable interview with Infobae, they pointed with conviction and with pain toward the one person they believed held the key: Teresa Mendoza. She was, in their words, the key figure, the one who was there last, the one who knew what Jacobo was working on, the one who vanished alongside his brother. The celebrated actor Ari Telch had his own reckoning with the mystery. When asked about the more esoteric theories surrounding Jacobo's disappearance, the theories involving spiritual transcendence, higher dimensions, Shiva Shambho, Telch did not mince words. He called them ignorant. He called them stupid. And you understand his anger. Because when someone you love vanishes, you don't want poetry. You want answers. His sons, David and Jerry, have carried a different kind of weight. The weight of not knowing, of growing up without resolution, of holidays that are haunted by an empty chair. And Astucia Grinberg, his daughter, who has spoken publicly about the toll of a father who exists only in questions, she carries the weight too, but with something else, something harder to name. A stubborn refusal to let the story die.
If you're still with me, and I know you are because this story won't let you go, make sure you've subscribed and hit the bell. Part 1 is in the description if you missed it. Because what comes next is where the shadows deepen. 5 theories, 5 explanations for how a man, a real, breathing, brilliant man, could vanish from the face of the earth without a trace. Each one has its believers, each one has its problems, and the truth, if it exists, may be worse than all of them. Theory 1. The most human explanation. Teresa Mendoza. The family believes she is the key, and it's not hard to see why. A dual disappearance, husband and wife within the same window of time, suggests coordination or conspiracy. Some researchers have speculated that Mendoza was connected to forces that wanted Jacobo's work suppressed. Others believe the answer is simpler and sadder, that personal turmoil, the unraveling of a marriage, the weight of being married to a man who lived more in the invisible than the visible, that this was enough to make 2 people want to disappear. Theory 2. Voluntary disappearance. In 2025, journalist Emiliano Ruiz Parra published a groundbreaking article titled Las Desapariciones de Jacobo Grinberg, and in it, he explored a tantalizing possibility, that Jacobo didn't vanish, that he left, that he accepted funding from sources we cannot name because they don't want to be named, to disappear, to continue his research in total secrecy, away from the prying eyes of academia, away from the Mexican government, away from everyone who might try to stop him. Think about it. If you had just proven that consciousness could transmit between brains, would you publish it? Or would you go deeper? Theory 3. The government. And this one has documentation. A verified, declassified CIA document confirms what many had long suspected. The United States intelligence community was watching Jacobo Grinberg. They were interested in his work on consciousness because they understood what it could do. Brain-to-brain communication. The ability to transmit thought without words, without wires, without any technology we currently understand. Now ask yourself, if you were the CIA, if you were the Mexican Intelligence Service, CISEN, and a scientist had just cracked open the door to telepathy, would you let him publish? Or would you make him disappear? His own writings hint at this. Grinberg himself documented receiving proposals from American military agencies. He wrote about being approached, about being offered resources in exchange for exclusive access to his research. He also wrote about refusing. And we know what happens to scientists who refuse the wrong people. Theory 4. The Castaneda connection. Carlos Castaneda, the controversial author whose books about the Yaqui sorcerer Don Juan sold millions of copies, had built something by the early 90s that looked less like a literary movement and more like a cult. He had followers, he had inner circles, he had a structure of control that extended into the personal lives of his devotees. And Teresa Mendoza, Jacobo's wife, has been linked to Castaneda's circle. Some researchers believe she didn't just know Castaneda's people, they believe she delivered Jacobo to them. What happened after that is speculation
wrapped in shadow.
And then there is Theory 5, the one that Jacobo himself would have found fascinating. The theory that he didn't disappear, that he transcended, that he found what he was looking for, that after years of studying shamans, after mapping the neuronal field, after proving that consciousness was not confined to the skull, but was a fundamental property of the universe itself, that he cracked the code, that he found the lattice, and that he stepped through it. He was last seen in Tepoztlan, near the ancient pyramid of El Tepozteco, a structure built to honor a god of pulque, of altered consciousness, of the spaces between worlds. A place where, for centuries, people have reported strange phenomena, visions, time distortions, the feeling of being watched by something that has no eyes. Did he go there to hide? Did he go there to meet someone? Or did he go there because the lattice is thinner in places where ancient people built temples to the invisible? 5 theories, 5 doors, and behind each one, a different kind of darkness. We may never know which door Jacobo walked through, but what we can know, what we do know, is what happened next, to his ideas, to his legacy, to the world of science. And this is where the story gets extraordinary. In 2025, the National Science Foundation, the most prestigious scientific funding body in the United States, awarded a $600,000 grant to Northern Illinois University. The researcher? Chang Su Nam. The subject? Brain-to-brain communication. Let that sink in. The exact same research that Jacobo Grinberg was conducting in the 1980s. The experiments that his colleagues mocked, that his university barely tolerated, that the scientific establishment dismissed as pseudoscience, is now being funded by the United States government. 30 years too late to save him, but not too late to prove him right. In the labs at NIU, researchers are using technology that Grinberg could only dream of. Magnetoencephalography, advanced neural imaging, computational models that can process billions of data points per second. And they are finding exactly what he found, that when 2 brains are engaged in deep communication, genuine, focused, intentional communication, something measurable happens. The neural patterns synchronize. The brain waves align. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, physically. A lattice of connection forms between 2 minds. At the University of Washington, scientists have taken it further. Brain-to-brain interfaces, direct transmission of thought from one human being to another, mediated by technology but powered by something we still don't fully understand. At the University of Barcelona, researchers achieved brain-to-brain communication across 7,800 kilometers. 7,800 kilometers! A thought transmitted from one mind to another across an ocean. And then there's the headline that should have made every neuroscientist in the world stop and think about Jacobo Grinberg. Popular mechanics. Scientists merged 3 human brains by thought alone. 3 brains merged by thought. This is not science fiction. This is 2025. And this is what Jacobo was trying to tell us 30 years ago, in a lab that no longer exists, with notes that were stolen or destroyed, by a man who vanished without a trace. But it's not just the experiments. It's the theory, the fundamental question of what consciousness is. For decades, mainstream science told us that consciousness was an accident, an epiphenomenon, something the brain does, like digestion is something the stomach does. That worldview is crumbling. Integrated Information Theory, IIT, proposes that consciousness is not produced by the brain. It is a fundamental property of reality itself. Like gravity, like electromagnetism. It doesn't emerge from complexity. It is complexity. It is woven into the fabric of existence.
And there is a word for this idea, an old word, one that philosophers have debated for centuries. Panpsychism. The notion that consciousness is everywhere, in every atom, in every electron, in the space between stars. That the universe is not dead matter that somehow learned to think, that it is instead thinking matter that learned to be. Jacobo Grinberg believed this, not as philosophy, not as poetry, as science. He called it the neuronal field. He called it the lattice. And the scientific establishment called him a fool. But the government didn't think he was a fool. No, the government thought he was useful. And here is where we must talk about Stargate. Not the television show, the real one. The Stargate project was a classified United States government program that ran for over 20 years, from the early 1970s to the mid-1990s. Its purpose? Remote viewing. The use of psychic perception, consciousness untethered from the body, to gather military intelligence. This was not a conspiracy theory. This is documented fact, declassified, published, acknowledged by the CIA itself. The Stargate project used trained psychics, real people with real abilities, documented and tested, to spy on Soviet military installations, to locate hostages, to describe facilities they had never visited. And it worked. Not perfectly, not consistently, but well enough that the United States government funded it for 2 decades. Well enough that when they finally shut it down in 1995, they didn't say it was because it didn't work. They said they couldn't verify the intelligence reliably enough for operational use. That is a very different statement than it was fake. So let's put this together. Jacobo Grinberg proved, in laboratory conditions, with EEG recordings, with peer-reviewed data, that consciousness could transmit between brains. The United States government was simultaneously running a classified program that depended on exactly this kind of consciousness transfer. And then Jacobo vanished, and his lab was emptied. And 30 years later, the same science he pioneered is being funded by the very institutions that once dismissed it. I am not telling you what to believe. I am telling you what happened. And I am letting the silence between the facts speak for itself. There is one more piece of evidence that rarely makes it into the academic discussions. Grinberg's observation, documented in his extensive fieldwork with Mexican shamans, that these practitioners used both brain hemispheres simultaneously, broadly, equally, without the hemispheric dominance that characterizes ordinary waking consciousness. Modern neuroscience, using advanced EEG and fMRI technology, has now confirmed this. In altered states of consciousness, whether through meditation, through ritual, or through the practices of traditional healers, the brain does indeed show expanded hemispheric coherence. The two halves of the brain begin to function as one. And in that unity, something opens. Jacobo knew this in the 1980s, before the technology existed to prove it. He knew it because he went there. He sat with the shamans. He entered the states. He mapped the territory with the only instrument he had: his own extraordinary mind. And they erased his maps.
But ideas don't die. They just go underground. And in 2025, Jacobo Grinberg's ideas are resurfacing with a force that no one, not the Mexican government, not the CIA, not the ghost of Carlos Castaneda himself, could have predicted. In 2020, Netflix released The Secret of Dr. Grinberg, and suddenly, a story that had lived in whispers and academic footnotes reached millions of people worldwide. The documentary didn't solve the mystery, it couldn't. But it did something more important. It made people care. It turned a disappeared scientist into a cultural phenomenon. It put Jacobo's face on screens from Mexico City to Mumbai, from Sao Paulo to Stockholm. And it lit a fuse. New voices began to emerge. In September 2025, a man named Jose Luis Bueno Shen appeared on YouTube with a remarkable claim. He said he was Jacobo Grinberg's last apprentice. That before the disappearance, Grinberg had passed on his secrets, the techniques, the meditation practices, the understanding of the lattice, to a chosen few. And that he, Bueno Shen, was one of them. Whether you believe him or not, and many don't, his emergence speaks to something larger. The hunger. The hunger for this story to continue. Online communities have become the new temples of Grinberg's legacy. Reddit forums, r/holofractal, r/consciousness, r/conspiracy, are filled with thousands of posts analyzing his theories, debating his disappearance, connecting his work to modern discoveries. Instagram accounts dedicated to his story have tens of thousands of followers. His books are being republished: Pachita, The Syntergic Theory, the 7-volume series that mapped his 20-year journey into the deepest mysteries of the mind. New editions, new covers, new introductions by scientists who are finally brave enough to say what they couldn't say before: that Jacobo Grinberg was ahead of his time. Emiliano Ruiz Parra's 2025 article, Las Desapariciones de Jacobo Grinberg, brought new documentary rigor to the case. New interviews, new timelines, new connections drawn between the disappearance and the broader landscape of consciousness research. And with every new piece of the puzzle, the picture becomes not clearer, but larger, more complex, more unsettling. And here we arrive at the question that has no comfortable answer, the question that keeps this story alive, the question that Jacobo Grinberg spent his entire life trying to answer. What if he was right? Not about some of it, not about most of it, about all of it. What if consciousness really is a field? What if the lattice is real? What if the brain is not a generator, but a receiver, tuning into a frequency that has always been there, that will always be there, that is humming right now beneath the surface of everything you think you know? What if the shamans were right? What if the ancient builders of El Teposteco knew something that we are only now, with billion-dollar technology, beginning to rediscover? And what if Jacobo, brilliant, reckless, obsessive Jacobo, reached it first? What if he sat in his lab in Mexico City, surrounded by EEG machines and shamanic artifacts, and mapped the territory that the rest of us are too afraid to enter? What if they took his notes not because they were wrong, but because they were right? We cannot answer these questions. Not today, maybe not ever. But the fact that they can be asked
in 2025 in peer-reviewed journals, in NSF-funded laboratories, in the same breath as integrated information theory and panpsychism. That fact is Jacobo Grinberg's vindication. We're getting close to the end now, and I need you to stay with me. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because the last chapter of this story is the one that stays with you. December 8th, 1994. Tepoztlan, Mexico. A man walks toward the mountains. The ancient pyramid watches from above. The air is cool. The stars are out. And somewhere in the space between the known and the unknown, between the firing of a neuron and the birth of a thought, between the waking world and the dream, something is waiting. Something that has always been waiting. Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum was born on December 12, 1946. He vanished on December 8, 1994. His body has never been found. His case has never been solved. His research has never been fully recovered. But his ideas, his extraordinary, impossible, beautiful ideas, are alive. More alive now than they have ever been. Somewhere in a laboratory at Northern Illinois University, a researcher named Chang Su Nam is running experiments on brain-to-brain communication. He has $600,000 of government funding. He has state-of-the-art technology. He has a hypothesis that would have sounded insane 20 years ago. And somewhere in the footnotes of his grant proposal, in the bibliography of his papers, the ghost of Jacobo Grinberg whispers, "I told you so." The case remains open. The theories remain unproven. The family still grieves. The world still wonders. And the lattice, if it exists, remains. There is a word in quantum physics, entanglement. It describes two particles that, once connected, remain linked no matter how far apart they are. Measure one, and the other responds, instantly, across any distance. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. He meant it as a criticism, but the universe didn't care what Einstein meant. It simply was. Maybe Jacobo is entangled with us still. Maybe somewhere in the lattice of reality, in the neuronal field he mapped, in the consciousness he proved was everywhere, he is still reaching, still searching, still asking the questions that the rest of us are only now learning to formulate. Or maybe he is simply gone. A man who vanished. A mystery that will never be solved. Thank you for watching this two-part deep dive into the disappearance of Jacobo Grinberg. If this story made you question what's possible, if it left you with that feeling that there's more to this world than we can see, then I need you to do two things. First, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. And second, drop a comment below. Tell me what you think happened to Jacobo Grinberg, because honestly, I think the truth is stranger than anything we've imagined. Until next time.